The moment when an avoidant returns, reject them the right way. There is a very specific moment that almost no one talks about. The moment when an avoidant finally returns, and you realize that the power you thought you lost was never actually gone. This is not the dramatic movie scene people imagine. It's quiet. It's subtle. Sometimes it's just a message that says, "Hey, how have you been?" But inside that small gesture is a massive emotional shift. Because by the time an avoidant returns, you are no longer the person who was abandoned, confused, or chasing answers. You are someone who has lived without them, regulated your nervous system, and rediscovered your center. And this is exactly why rejecting them the right way matters more than getting them back ever did. When an avoidant comes back, it's rarely because they suddenly healed, reflected deeply, or had an emotional awakening. More often, it's because distance removed the pressure they associate with intimacy. Avoidants don't miss people the way anxious partners do. They miss the feeling of safety without obligation. They miss the version of you that existed when they could engage on their terms. And when you're gone long enough, your absence creates a quiet comparison they can't ignore. New connections feel flatter. Emotional exchanges feel transactional. And suddenly, the bond they once minimized starts to feel meaningful again. This is where most people make the mistake. The moment the avoidant returns, the old emotional reflex wakes up. Hope rushes in. The mind starts filling gaps with fantasy. Maybe they've changed. Maybe this time will be different. And in that vulnerable opening, people either overgive or overreact. They either welcome the avoidant back with open arms, trying to prove they're safe now, or they lash out, using rejection as revenge. Both responses come from the same place: emotional reactivity. And emotional reactivity is exactly what avoidants unconsciously expect. Rejecting an avoidant the right way is not about punishment. It's not about winning. It's not about teaching them a lesson. It's about alignment. It's about responding from the version of you that no longer abandons yourself for emotional crumbs. The right rejection doesn't spike their defenses. It doesn't trigger shame. And it doesn't pull you back into the old push-pull dynamic. Instead, it communicates something far more powerful: emotional maturity without attachment. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If an avoidant returns and you still feel the urge to explain your pain in detail, to justify your worth, or to make them understand what they did, you're not ready to reject them yet. Because the right rejection doesn't need a speech. It doesn't need emotional evidence. It doesn't even need closure. The right rejection is calm, grounded, and complete all on its own. The avoidant expects one of two reactions when they return. They expect warmth that feels familiar and safe, or coldness that confirms their belief that closeness leads to discomfort. What they don't expect is neutrality. They don't expect someone who is open but unavailable, kind but unmoved, present but not pulled. That response short-circuits the old dynamic because it removes the emotional charge they rely on to define the relationship. Rejecting them the right way starts with timing. Not emotional timing, but nervous system timing. If your heart rate spikes when you see their name, you wait. If you feel the urge to respond instantly, you pause. If your body feels tight, reactive, or anxious, you don't engage yet. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional intensity, even when they deny it. Responding from a regulated state isn't a tactic. It's a boundary. When you do respond, less is more. Over-explaining is a form of chasing disguised as clarity. Avoidants don't process emotional essays as connection. They experience them as pressure. The right rejection is simple, respectful, and self-contained. It sounds like someone who has already made peace with the outcome, not someone trying to influence it. For example, instead of saying, "You really hurt me, and I've spent months trying to heal, and I don't know if I can trust you again," the right rejection sounds like, "I'm in a different place now, and I'm not interested in revisiting the past." There's no accusation, no defensiveness, no emotional bait, just truth. This is where the power shift happens, because the avoidant doesn't hear rejection as rejection. They hear it as emotional autonomy. And emotional autonomy is the one thing they both crave and fear. It signals that you are no longer orienting your emotional world around their availability. You're not asking them to choose you. You've already chosen yourself. Many people worry that rejecting an avoidant this way will push them away forever. But here's the paradox. The only rejection that ever reaches an avoidant is one that doesn't try to control the outcome. When you reject them calmly, without bitterness or longing, it forces them to confront something they've spent their whole lives avoiding. The reality that connection is optional, not guaranteed. And if they push back, if they say things like, "I just wanted to see how you were," or "I wasn't trying to get back together," you don't defend yourself. Defensiveness reopens the door. You simply stay consistent. Consistency is the language of safety, and safety is the language avoidants understand best. The right rejection also means you don't close the door dramatically. You don't block, ghost, or disappear unless you genuinely need to for your well-being. You remain polite, grounded, emotionally unavailable. That combination is incredibly confronting for someone who is used to control through distance. Here's the deeper layer most people miss. When you reject an avoidant the right way, you're not rejecting them. You're rejecting the version of yourself that accepted inconsistency as love. You're signaling to your nervous system that unpredictability is no longer attractive. And once that shift happens internally, the external dynamic changes automatically. Avoidants often return more than once, especially when the rejection is done cleanly. Not because you played a game, but because you removed the emotional supply they unconsciously relied on. And without that supply, they're forced to feel the weight of their choices without the cushion of your emotional availability. This is also why you don't follow up. You don't check in later. You don't reopen conversations. Closure is not something you ask for. It's something you embody. The moment you stop seeking emotional resolution from someone who couldn't give it, you become resolved. There's a quiet confidence that comes from rejecting an avoidant the right way. It doesn't feel triumphant. It feels peaceful. There's no rush afterward, no adrenaline crash, just a sense of alignment, and that's how you know it was done correctly. Some people will tell you the goal is to make the avoidant regret losing you, but regret is irrelevant. The real win is when their return no longer disrupts your emotional state, when their message feels informational, not activating, when you realize that the version of you they're trying to reconnect with doesn't exist anymore. And if they truly had changed, if they came back with accountability, consistency, and emotional availability, you wouldn't need to reject them dramatically either. You would simply evaluate them calmly. But most returns aren't that. They're curiosity without capacity, familiarity without readiness. And that's why the right rejection isn't harsh. It's discerning. At the end of the day, the moment an avoidant returns is not a test of your attractiveness. It's a test of your growth. It reveals whether you've healed enough to stop negotiating with inconsistency, whether you can choose peace over intensity, whether you can walk away without burning the bridge or yourself. Rejecting an avoidant the right way is the final boundary, not because it ends the connection, but because it ends the cycle. And once the cycle ends, everything else in your life begins to align in ways you didn't even know were possible.